This first story comes from a man named Matt, who once worked as a night shift janitor in an office building located in an industrial area of New York. Matt said his job was simple. He clocked in at 10 p.m., cleaned the 4-story office building by himself, and left before sunrise. At first, the job felt normal, but one night gave him an experience he would never forget. That night, Matt started on the ground floor. He mopped the long, empty hallway. The squeak of the mop and the rolling sound of the bucket were the only things breaking the silence. As he approached the employee kitchen area, his eyes caught something that made him stop. On the floor, there was a dark red stain, almost like dried blood. At first, he thought it might be spilled ketchup or paint. But when he knelt down to wipe it away, the liquid was thick, deep red, and stubborn to remove. He tried scrubbing, but the mark remained faintly visible. A sense of unease crept in, but he forced himself to ignore it and continued his work. An hour later, he moved up to the second floor. This floor was darker, with only a few dim lights left on. As he passed by the meeting rooms, his nose caught a foul stench. It was strong, nauseating, like rotting flesh. Matt covered his nose and searched for the source. He opened room after room, but each one was empty. No trash, no spoiled food. The smell grew stronger near the stairwell. When he shined his flashlight down the stairwell, he saw nothing. Just darkness and damp air that felt colder than the rest of the building. He quickly shut the door and returned to the hallway. The uneasiness grew worse. Every time he entered a new room, the stench would reappear for a moment, then vanish again, as if something was following him. Around 2 a.m., Matt reached the 3rd floor. While cleaning a small office in the corner, he heard a faint knocking sound on the wall. Tap, tap, tap. 3 times. He froze, listening carefully. The sound stopped. He convinced himself it might just be pipes. A few minutes later, the knocking returned. Louder this time, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. His skin crawled. He knew the wall he heard it from connected to the archive room, a storage space that was rarely opened. He gathered his courage, unlocked the door, and peeked inside with his flashlight. The archive room was completely empty. No movement, no sound. Matt's heart raced. He regretted ever taking this night shift, but the job had to be done. With nervous hands, he moved on to the 4th floor, the last floor of the building. That was when the worst part of the night happened. The 4th floor was quiet, with only a few executive offices. While mopping near a large window, Matt suddenly felt a presence. The distinct, heavy sensation of being watched. Slowly, he turned his head toward the end of the hallway. And there, he saw it. A tall, elderly man was standing at the far end of the corridor. His hair was long and white, his face pale with hollow black eyes. He wore an old, torn suit, his body unnaturally thin, almost skeletal. The man didn't move. He only stared directly at Matt. Matt's body locked in fear. His mop clattered to the floor, the bucket tipping over and spilling water across the tiles. He stumbled backward, but the instant he blinked, the old man was gone. The hallway was empty again, silent except for the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The stench returned, stronger than ever. It filled the entire 4th floor, so pungent that Matt gagged. He clutched his mouth, trying not to vomit, and bolted for the stairwell. As he rushed down the steps, he heard it. Footsteps behind him. Heavy, deliberate, echoing after his own. He turned his head. Nothing was there. Matt ran faster, nearly falling over himself, until he burst out of the stairwell onto the ground floor. He left his mop, his bucket, everything. He sprinted straight out of the building into the cold night air. He sat in his car, gasping, his body trembling uncontrollably. No matter how hard he tried to rationalize, he knew what he saw. He knew what he felt. The next morning, Matt told his coworker about what had happened. His coworker just stared at him for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "You're not the first one to see him. A lot of janitors don't last here. That building was constructed over the site of an old hospital. They say an elderly doctor hanged himself there, on the 4th floor." Matt never took another night shift in that building again. In fact, not long after, he quit the job entirely. To this day, he swears he will never step foot inside that office again. This story comes from a woman named Alice, who once worked the night shift as a janitor in an office building in Minnesota. For Alice, working late nights wasn't unusual. She had taken jobs before that required her to be alone in large buildings after hours. The silence, the emptiness, it never really bothered her. But there was one night that changed everything. A night so terrifying, she walked away from the job forever. It started around 11 p.m. Alice was assigned to clean the lobby first, sweeping the floors, wiping down the glass doors, making sure the chairs and tables looked neat for the next morning. The building was quiet, only the low hum of the ventilation system filling the air. Once she finished downstairs, she headed up to the 2nd floor. That's where a row of small offices and meeting rooms lined the hallway. While mopping the hallway, she heard a sudden clatter behind her. It was sharp, echoing in the stillness. Alice turned around quickly and froze. Lying on the floor just a few feet behind her was a broom. The problem was, she hadn't brought any brooms upstairs. All of her supplies were still in the janitor's closet downstairs. She was certain of it. The hallway had been completely empty when she arrived. Trying to rationalize, Alice picked up the broom, telling herself maybe she had left it leaning against the wall earlier. She went back to her work, pushing the mop across the floor. But only a few minutes later, the broom suddenly flew sideways, slamming against the wall with a loud crack. Alice's chest tightened. Her mind scrambled for an explanation, but she found none. She quickly carried the broom back to the janitor's closet, shoved it inside, and locked the door. Her hands trembled as she returned to her duties. Next, she rolled out the vacuum cleaner to work on the carpeted offices. At first it ran normally, buzzing across the floor. But halfway through, the vacuum abruptly shut off. The power cord was still plugged in. The outlet was working. Yet the vacuum refused to run. Alice crouched down to check the machine, and before she could touch it, the vacuum lifted off the ground and hurled itself several feet away. It crashed hard against the floor, skidding across the carpet. Alice stumbled back, her heart hammering in her chest. At this point, she couldn't deny it anymore. Something was in that building with her. Shaken, she retreated into one of the conference rooms, hoping to calm her nerves. She sat at the long table, head in her hands, trying to steady her breathing. That's when she heard it. A slow, heavy breathing sound. It wasn't hers. It wasn't coming from her chest. It was in the room, behind her. Deep, steady breaths, as if someone was standing only a few feet away. Alice snapped her head around. Nothing. The room was empty. Her eyes darted across the table to the chairs lined up neatly on either side. She told herself she was imagining things. But then, one of the chairs at the far end of the table shifted on its own. It slid a few inches across the carpet. Alice's blood ran cold. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then suddenly, the chair scraped violently, shooting back against the table with a loud screech. That broke her paralysis. Alice bolted out of the room, running down the hallway. She tried to reach the stairwell, but before she could, a dark figure darted across the hallway in front of her. Tall, human-shaped, but featureless. Just a silhouette, moving unnaturally fast. Alice froze, her entire body trembling. She backed away slowly, when suddenly, the door to the janitor's closet slammed open. From inside, buckets, mops, and cleaning supplies flew out, clattering across the floor as if someone had hurled them with force. Alice screamed, stumbling backward, before spinning around and sprinting down the stairs. On the stairwell, she felt it. A shove against her back, hard enough to almost throw her forward. She grabbed the railing at the last second, saving herself from tumbling down the steps. She didn't dare look back. She just kept running. Tears streamed down her face as she burst through the lobby, pushed through the exit doors, and raced to her car. Her hands shook so badly she struggled to start the engine. But once it roared to life, she peeled out of the parking lot, refusing to glance at the building in her rear-view mirror. Alice never returned that night. But the next morning, she had no choice but to come back for her belongings. Her locker was still in the janitor's room on the first floor. Walking into the building in broad daylight, everything looked normal. The offices were lit, the sunlight streaming through the windows, but the air still felt wrong, cold, heavy, as if something lingered. Alice unlocked her locker and froze. Inside, neatly placed on top of her folded uniform, was a toy broom. Small, plastic, the kind that might come with a child's play set. Alice's stomach dropped. She hadn't put it there. No one else had the key. She slammed the locker shut, her pulse racing. She didn't wait to speak to anyone. She walked straight out of the building, got into her car, and drove away. Alice never picked up her final paycheck. To this day, she refuses to step foot near that building again. Because whatever had happened to her that night, it had left a message, and she was certain it hadn't wanted her to leave. This story comes from someone who chose to remain anonymous. He once worked the night shift as a janitor in a high school somewhere in the United States. The building was old, long hallways lined with lockers, classrooms packed tightly together, and a wide gym at the far end. During the day, the school was full of noise and life. Students shouting, teachers lecturing, footsteps echoing from class to class. But at night, it became a completely different place. Silent, empty, lit only by buzzing fluorescent lights that seemed far too dim for the size of the building. He started his shift at 10 p.m. Like most nights, he began by sweeping and mopping the main hallway near the gym. The only sounds were the soft squeak of his shoes and the swish of the mop. That's when he heard it. The faint sound of footsteps running. Small, quick footsteps, like children playing tag. The sound came from the far end of the hall, echoing off the walls. He froze. No one else was supposed to be in the building. When he turned to look, The hallway was empty. The lockers, the doors, the windows, all still. He brushed it off as his imagination and went back to mopping. But minutes later, another sound reached him. This time it was laughter. Light, childish laughter. Almost playful, but distorted somehow, as if carried through an old speaker. The sound came from one of the classrooms behind him. Gripping the mop tightly, he approached the door and slowly pushed it open. The classroom was pitch dark. He switched on the light. Desks neatly arranged, chairs stacked, nothing out of place. But then his eyes went to the chalkboard at the front of the room. Written in large white letters were 3 words: "We're still here." His stomach dropped. That message hadn't been there earlier when he did his inspection rounds. He was sure of it. With a shaking hand, he grabbed the eraser and wiped the words away. He shut the classroom door hard behind him, refusing to look back. Trying to focus, he moved to the library, hoping the quiet would settle his nerves. The library was large, filled with tall wooden shelves. Normally it was his favorite place to clean, but tonight it felt suffocating. As he arranged books on one of the tables, he began to hear whispers, soft multiplying. Dozens of voices, speaking all at once in hushed tones. He couldn't make out the words, but they seemed to circle him, darting from one shelf to the next. He raised his flashlight, peering between the rows of books. Nothing. The whispering stopped when he got close, only to start up again behind him, louder, closer. It felt like something was moving around him, fast and invisible. His chest tightened. He abandoned the books and bolted out of the library. When he reached the hallway, his blood turned to ice. At the far end stood a small figure. It looked like a child. Its body was frail, its arms dangling at its sides. But the face, there was no face, no eyes, no mouth, just pale skin stretched smooth. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there, head tilted slightly, like it was watching him. Then, without warning, it sprinted toward him. The janitor screamed, dropping the mop in his hands, and ran for the stairs. He flew down the steps, barely keeping his balance. But the horror didn't stop there. As he reached the first floor, the PA system crackled to life overhead. The intercom that should have been shut off since the afternoon buzzed loudly, then filled the halls with sound. It was the sound of children singing. A nursery rhyme. Slow, eerie, echoing through every speaker in the building. Ring around the rosy, ring around the rosy. His skin crawled. He covered his ears, but the song was everywhere. It followed him down the hall as he sprinted toward the front entrance. When he tried the doors, they wouldn't budge. They rattled under his grip, but stayed locked tight, as though bolted shut from the outside. Panic consumed him. He banged on the glass, kicked the frame, but nothing moved. And that's when he saw them. The hallways behind him were no longer empty. They were lined with shadows. Dozens of them. Small shapes the size of children, standing perfectly still against the lockers. One by one they turned their heads toward him. Though their faces were blurred, featureless, he felt their stares cutting into him. He shut his eyes, slammed his fists against the door, and suddenly, it gave way. The door swung open, and he stumbled into the cold night air. The second he was outside, the singing stopped. The whispers, the footsteps, the shadows, all gone. He didn't think twice. He sprinted to his car, shaking so violently he could barely fit the key into the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, He tore out of the parking lot without once looking back at the school. The next morning, he quit his job without explanation. He refused to collect his final pay. To this day, he never tells people which school it was. He never goes near it, and he doesn't care to know who or what left that message on the chalkboard that night, because the words still haunt him. We're still here.